Hi, everybody. It's great to see you here today. And we have a wonderful talk in store that I think is really going to help us all learn some very interesting things. We all struggle in the work that we do with how important it is to bring diverse groups together that don't see eye to eye. And sometimes it feels overwhelming in terms of the challenges to figure out how to find the common ground, how to not feel like you're always starting from scratch, not feel like you're just not being successful in this. And we have two leaders here who are going to help us think about some of these issues in the great work that they've done in New Hampshire and elsewhere in terms of bridging political and social divides and stories from the Civic Engagement Project, from New Hampshire Listens. And so Michele, Holt-Shannon, and Bruce Mallory drove all the way up from New Hampshire, all the way up to help us have a chance to learn together and to think about whether there are ways perhaps that we can learn and work together in terms of the kinds of things going on in Maine and the kinds of things going on in New Hampshire. And you know from the work that we're doing here that we're working on things like dams and how do you bring people together in terms of thinking about whether or not dams should be maintained or removed, in terms of thinking about beaches and shellfish and contamination and what do we do about that. We're thinking about energy issues and the complicated and fractured kinds of issues there. I think you were just saying, aren't you on the energy board or something for your island? So, kind of thinking about those sorts of issues. And one of the things that's really interesting that we'll probably hear a little bit about in terms of their work is in some ways using metaphors to think about what you're doing. And Bridie, you do a lot of interesting work in that area. In one of the writings that they've done, they have the following paragraph that is just so interesting in terms of some of the kinds of things we've been thinking about. So they say, we apply the metaphor of community compost to emphasize the value of eliciting diverse points of view on hot topics that have divided residents as well as public officials. By turning the fertile soil of passion, values, and disagreement, we have been able to find common ground useful to decision makers. Balancing the need for safety and the benefits of strong disagreement, shared understanding, and agreement may be achieved. And one of our projects here has been on trash and on compost and thinking about these kinds of issues. So that really resonates in terms of a metaphor. So we're looking forward to getting a chance to hear about the experiences that you've had. So thank you for driving up and spending this time with us.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you all for coming this afternoon to hear stories. Maybe not quite literally about compost, but about working with the diverse ingredients that come together in any community to make it a thriving, vibrant place that's participatory and essentially democratic. So some of the stories we're going to tell this afternoon relate to some of the kind of environmental science and sustainability work that many of you I know do. Other stories will be from other parts of community life, and you'll be thinking about what those linkages are, perhaps back to your own work. Before I get started, I do want to acknowledge that you all, in various ways, lost a colleague last week in the field, a climate scientist who was trying to gather information that would make this world a better place, and he sacrificed himself in that process. And my condolences and thoughts to the community here for that. Again, we're happy to be here. Michele and I launched New Hampshire Listens about almost 7 years ago. We co-direct that effort, and we're just going to share some stories from the field with you today. So that's about it. Michele will remind me about what's coming up here. This is the title of the topic, as Linda indicated. And these are stories of civic and sometimes even civil engagement. We know that the contemporary context for political conversation, political discourse, I would say something like, well, it couldn't possibly get worse. But in fact, it seems to. When we started this work 7 years ago or so, we said that at that time, our country was so divided that the level of discourse in terms of people trying to solve problems at the local, state, and national level was unproductive, was personalized, was polarizing and divisive, and the effort that we started with New Hampshire Listens we saw as kind of an antidote to that condition. So on any measure of success over the past 7 years, we've totally failed because things, as I say, things have gotten worse. But that doesn't mean there's not still an important need for the kind of public engagement process using tools of deliberation, dialogue, to strengthen participation in public life isn't still really terribly important.
You wanted to skip that part? Did you want to skip that part?
Which? No, this is
Okay, but you went. Sorry. So this is often when two facilitators co-present together. It's, we have this highly interactive conversational overlapping. I'm going to try and not interrupt you. You try not to interrupt me. Actually, as a way to start, and I'm not sure if there's a possibility of interacting with anyone who might not be in the room with us, but I would love it if you just turn to each other just for a second and talk about a time when you were part of addressing a problem in your community organization, and what was it that made your time worthwhile. So just a couple of minutes talking with a neighbor. A time when you were part of addressing a problem in your community or your organization. What about that made it worth your time? Can I have a few folks share a couple of things that you talked about? What made your time worthwhile?
Linda and I were talking about our respective experiences in communities, and I've been working with shellfishermen, and we've been trying to address water quality issues, and certainly success there has been meaningful, but the relationships that have been built in these efforts have really been valuable to me. And Linda was talking about some unexpected moments, maybe from one perspective, seeming failures in a process, and learning from some of those things that you didn't anticipate and were really challenging at the time.
Great. We hope we'll share a few failures with you today. Any other thoughts or ideas, something different? Made your time worthwhile?
Okay. I think I was talking with Andrew, who's a graduate student, and for me, I said that working with students on real problems that I think have real power to be a transformative experience for students, that they're actually participating in addressing issues that help the community. Radio backing up on that.
And the messiness of some of it. Did you have a thought to share?
Sure. I was talking about on a similar vein, interacting with the public when it comes to environmental concerns. And I had very similar conclusions that I drew from that as well.
Great. Well, Bruce was talking about sort of the contested public life, and especially now, I think, feeling like we're showing up at a public meeting or some sort of gathering where people are invested in public life in some way. It can be tough, so it's nice to kind of think like, why do we do this? Why do we invest in our community? Why do we get involved? And what are the kinds of things where we feel like we're seeing payoff? And what are the times where we feel like we just want to bang our head against the wall? And we've just met with people who believe just like us, or we've talked to people but not gotten through to people who see the world very differently. So we will spend a little time talking about that today. One of the things I just want to put in front of us in this, this big frame, because we're going to be in the weeds, in the trees, in the forest today with some of the stories that we're going to tell. But we're very aware that we're a part of trying to show and build a case for public engagement, the efficacy of public engagement, why it matters, not just because we philosophically think it's the right thing to do and you want to involve people in your community, but does it actually pay off? And who's doing that research? Are they paying attention to how sustained public engagement can add up? And so very recently, the Journal for Public Deliberation had a whole series of articles on equity and public engagement. And one of them is the economic argument for engagement. and just emerging evidence, especially in Brazil and the global south, suggesting that sustained patterns of engagement build social capital. And it's the sustained piece that that hopefully some of our stories will illuminate, even though we also participate in one-off moments where you feel like, oh, you're bringing people together for a one-time thing. But the sustained effort is certainly one of the things that we're interested in.
So just a little bit more framing language here that's been useful to us and maybe useful as you think about bringing the challenges that you work with out into the public for public deliberation purposes. Archon Fung is at the Kennedy School in Harvard, and in a 2015 article on participatory governance, he laid out these three concepts. These are sort of anchor concepts for us: legitimacy, effectiveness, and social justice and equity. And so he asks the large question: what are the purposes of participation in governance, and how do we know it can make a difference? What are we trying to achieve through greater participatory processes, bringing more folks into interactions with decision makers, so the decisions that are made by policymakers are legitimate, effective, and address fundamental principles of social justice or equity. But in the legitimacy frame, we're asking the general question: do folks who participate in these public deliberative processes are they more likely to believe that decision makers are acting in ways that have integrity? Do we trust our public decision makers, our elected officials? Do we think that the processes that they use are open and transparent and legitimate, or is it the old metaphor of behind closed doors and smoke-filled rooms? I guess these days you're not allowed to smoke in those smoke-filled rooms, but oftentimes it's behind closed doors. And certainly one of our candidates right now in the national elections, that's a problem that candidate carries around in terms of decision making, that a style of decision making. So there are questions about legitimacy there. Effectiveness asks the direct question: are the decisions that our elected officials or our policymakers making, those that we give the authority to make those kinds of decisions, are they making decisions that are effective? Are the goals that are being laid out being achieved as a result of those decisions? And here, the qualification that's important is that the challenges themselves are challenges that are defined by everyday people and by stakeholders, not just by decision makers, not by elected officials. It's by people who are a part of a larger public sphere. And then finally, social justice and equity questions are twofold. They're it's an input question and an output question. So on the input side, are all voices at the table when decisions are being made, or even when the challenges are being framed? So again, it's not the elite who are deciding what challenges need to be addressed, but it's everyday people and the stakeholders that are directly affected by the decisions that are being made. And then, so that's equity on the front end, and not only are they at the table, but also are they being heard. So if a young person, a high school student, shows up at a school board meeting, or somebody that never graduated from high school shows up at a school board meeting, are the elected officials actually listening to and attending to and respecting the input from that person, as opposed to when the president of the local bank shows up at the school board meeting and says something? And then on the other side, do the outcomes of decision making, are they equitable? Do they advantage some groups over other groups? Are the outcomes themselves, in fact, equitable? So legitimacy, effectiveness, and social justice or equity concerns are one way to evaluate enhanced participation. And then Matt Leininger, a good colleague of ours, has written 3 manuscripts, the last one with Josh Lerner. His first one from about 2004 is, I just lost my voice. I'll just have some coffee. There we go. Matt's book called The Next Form of Democracy is really framed around the transition from expert rule or thin democracy or technocratic democracy, experts get to make the decisions, to more distributed, thicker, and messier forms of decision making. So for Matt, that the next form of true democracy, of real democracy, that's legitimate and effective and attends to equity, is messier and thicker. We don't delegate decision-making powers to the people that we vote for. next Tuesday or whenever, we ourselves participate. We show up in decision-making processes. Matt's more recent monograph on making public participation legal focuses on ways to take a school board meeting or a city council meeting or a planning board meeting and have it become more deliberative. So there are certainly statutes, typically state statutes, that define how a school board meeting is supposed to operate, who gets to talk and for how long, and when there's a public comment period, and how those elected officials or appointed officials take into account input from the public. But there are ways to make even those moments more participatory, more deliberative, by asking people to work together in small groups, with a facilitator, to look at data, to think about the pros and cons of the options that are being laid out in front of them. So it's not just what we typically refer to as 2 minutes at a mic. So oftentimes the town meeting or the school board meeting is, there's a 15-minute public comment period, sometimes stuck at the end, so it's 10:30 at night, when now the public, whoever's left there, is allowed 2 minutes at the mic. And typically it's the people with the most specific agenda to drive home. And often it turns out to be the same person that shows up every second Tuesday for those 2 minutes at the mic to tell the school board that Common Core is evil and was created by the devil and it shouldn't be implemented in our school district. And so because of that nature of that interaction with those elected officials, it's easy for them to kind of discount that or ignore that. And so thinking about alternative ways to run public official meetings that enhance participation, enhance voice, is a goal of the work that we do. And just one example of that Matt and his colleague Josh Lerner have been working on now in the United States and in Brazil especially, and other parts of the world, is participatory budgeting. New York City now uses participatory budgeting at the sort of the ward level. Chicago has been using it for some period of time. Portsmouth, New Hampshire ran an experiment with it a couple of years ago, and Sao Paulo, Brazil, Hampton Roads, Virginia, other places around the world now are experimenting with essentially taking a group like this. So let's say we're all from Orono, we're all residents of Orono, or one would believe that. And the city council has said to us, we have make up a whole lot of numbers here, but let's say we have a $20 million annual budget for the city of Orono. We're gonna sequester out $1 million of that. A lot of it's fixed money for personnel and so on, but let's say that $1 million of that is discretionary. How would this group of people prioritize the spending of that public money, that $1 million? And we would go through a deliberative process with data, with interactions with our, the public works manager and the chief of police and the chief of the fire department and the superintendent of schools and so on, and hear about what their goals are and what their constraints are, and then as citizens, make a recommendation back to the city council about how to allocate that $1 million to reflect what our priorities are for public expenditures. So there's a great book published on this now. It seems to be getting some traction in the United States and in various parts of the country. So it's one that is a very concrete way of enhancing citizen participation and power in public decision making. And the last sort of framing that we want to lay out here, a recent publication on civic infrastructure. So again, back to metaphors, a lot of the work that we do and our colleagues around the country do is referred to as building civic infrastructure. So just like we have to have public infrastructure, civil infrastructure, roads and bridges and train tracks and internet systems and so on that connect us in a variety of ways or help us move from one point to another or convey information from one point to another, we need a civic infrastructure. And so the argument in this monograph is about the necessity of engaging all sectors. And that's much harder than simply saying those words. And we can give some examples of that as we go along today. Enlisting all voices, and so back to that democratic notion of equity, all voices are at the table, are heard at the table, and influence the outcomes that are made. And then finally, building pathways to share the knowledge and build on experiences of everyday citizens. So in a sense, everybody is an expert about their own lives, their own family, their own neighborhood, the potholes in front of their house, the water quality that comes into their house, the food that they eat. We are all experts about that. And so understanding that distributed expertise and then building pathways to connect that distributed expertise in our communities is a kind of infrastructure. So the kind of work that New Hampshire Listens does is a kind of a highway or a bridge that links folks across sectors, people from different social identities and backgrounds, degrees of power and status and authority in the community, and therefore people who have different ideas about how to solve problems, and that's the richness of this process. That's the compost, where as a result of that coming together, we produce heat, which is what a compost pile does, in the form of disagreement sometimes and searching for common ground, and then even produce fertile soil or solutions in the process as well.
Right. So, New Hampshire Listens was founded, we're entering our 7th year, so we're starting to say 7 years now instead of 6. And when we founded, I think it's fair to say we were mostly thinking about the work that we would do inside the room. We wanted to make sure we had trained facilitators, that we used different processes, small groups, and moving around on your feet, doing different kind of designs to get to the outcome that we were looking for, depending on the kind of meetings we were hosting or community conversations that we were hosting. And so we have, as we've evolved, we've certainly been thinking more about what happens outside of the room before you get there. It's 80-90% of the work seems to be before you even kind of show up to have some sort of deliberative moment. And part of that is getting a mix of voices in the room, among other things. But our principles actually haven't changed much from the beginning. We're focused on bringing people together from all walks of life, providing time for in-depth and informed conversations, respecting differences as well as seeking common ground. We don't use the term, we don't use it, so consensus. We don't use it, so I can't remember what it is. It's not about everybody kind of agreeing at the end. We try and use the areas of disagreement actually to help move forward. And that it's about outcomes that lead to informed community solutions. So, and that's everything from outcomes that are, we've now made a decision on this dangerous intersection, to outcomes of better understanding or relationship building when we're talking about racism. So it's the topics are all over the map, and talk is also action. So we count that because it's something that we need for sure. So we have, in terms of kind of how we're built, we're centrally lean. There's a couple of us at the Carsey School of Public Policy running New Hampshire Listens. Our cars get lots of miles on them. We have a couple graduate students and a couple of undergraduate students who work with us to different degrees over time. And we also have fellows that are spread out around the state, and they bring and sort of add to our diversity in terms of geographic location. So they're kind of spread around New Hampshire. Social identity, adding to our mix broadly in terms of race and gender and such. And then expertise areas. So we have some, someone who's really focused on youth engagement, someone who's really focused on behavioral health, someone else who's really focused on the environment. So we kind of have a mix of topics. And even though some of our, like Bruce said, we have a mix of examples to share with you, we have from the beginning been pretty topic agnostic. So the kinds of topics that have come to us have been everything from, we've been fighting over this dangerous intersection for 10 years and we have the money to fix it and we haven't fixed it yet, to the opiate epidemic, to flooding, to full-on science transfer projects, with the Great Bay, which we'll talk about a little bit. So we have local listens organizations, facilitators, and the focus of our work, we'll talk about scope a little bit. We started off thinking that we would do these statewide conversations and that we would just locate them all over the state so people would have access to them. One of our first projects was on gambling, whether or not we would add casinos to the state. And that was being voted on by the legislature and studied by a commission on gaming. And we actually use that kind of model really rarely now, and we'll talk about that as we go. But we've had kickoffs in communities. We were in a firehouse, and this was to talk about schools and community. We've had conversations on an action forum on early childhood. We've done conversations with where we work really hard to make sure youth are in the room. If you've ever heard of the adage, "Nothing about us without us." It's from that came from the early disability rights movement, but it applies really to anything that you can think of. We talk about education all the time without students in the room. We talk about treatment all the time without addicts in the room. We tend to make that mistake over and over again, and so we're really trying to pay attention to nothing about us without us. And also sometimes slowing down the process to have translation, going on. This is Concord, New Hampshire, and this is what Concord, New Hampshire looks like now. We still have these old images of who we are. For example, in this group, we had translation going from English to Swahili to an African dialect and back. In another group that same day, we had English to American Sign Language to Bhutanese Sign Language to an African dialect sign language and back. So it changes the pace of the conversation for sure. And this was a conversation that I'm sure you all are familiar with too. This was a gathering in Berlin, New Hampshire. 250 people came out to talk about recovery, treatment, and prevention in terms of the opiate crisis and the heroin epidemic. And it was a full room. Trying to think if I have one more thing to say, but it'll come to me later. No, go ahead.
What's nice is you can tell that this is not off the shelf. And we do it every week. This is, I'll personally, Michele has this experience too. This, for me, at this stage in my life and my career, is an opportunity. I learn something new every day when I do this work. There is no formula about this work. This is so dynamic and oftentimes unpredictable and so human that having been an academic for 38 years or so, this is a great passion. So we asked, what is it that people want? What, just everyday folks, what fulfills us in life that is more likely to get us engaged in our communities? And so I just wanted to, suggest a few ideas here. So one is to belong. We want to be a part of doing things with other people as we make a difference. Oftentimes we use the language, people want to see themselves as part of something bigger. Not everybody does. Some people are perfectly happy to be at home, by themselves. But most people want to belong, which is actually, my background is in actually special education, disability rights and policy. And this notion of belonging, for me, is central to that movement as well, because many societies, including our own, did such a good job of excluding people with disabilities for so many years. So just this really fundamental need to belong, to work with others. To be legitimate, to be seen as having a legitimate voice in our community. This is particularly true for young people who, I remember we were in a middle school a couple of years ago in New Hampshire. We were doing a facilitated conversation about what young people, how they saw their community, what they wanted in their community. And I remember observing a classroom, and there was a 6th grade boy present. And at the end of the conversation, he had this kind of light bulb went off, and he looked at the facilitator and he said, "This is the first time anybody has ever asked me what I wanted, or what I care about." I mean, we make this assumption that young people don't know or don't have a voice or don't count. And so a lot of our emphasis on legitimizing voices that oftentimes have been delegitimized as a bunch of social norms or cultural norms or downright racist behavior or structures. And then to make a difference, to have an impact. We all want to have some sense that we're making an impact on our own community, on our own neighborhoods, on our schools, on the organizations that we're in. So these constructs, belonging and voice and making a difference, are at the heart of why we do the work that we do around public participation, deliberations. The outcomes of the work are relationships. Somebody mentioned earlier that you do what makes it worthwhile when you try to get engaged in a community organization is you enter into new relationships. So stronger, more trusting relationships. The emergence of new leaders out of this work. So whenever we're in a community doing work and people who previously didn't see themselves as having an impact on public life realize that through these processes they can hold a microphone too, and their words can get recorded in a report that goes on to decision makers. And then innovation, innovative solutions that are outside the box. When you bring together a mix of folks of different ages and identities and backgrounds and education levels, that's when the kind of creative thinking, out of the box thinking, is more likely to surface. And then in general, just endorsement for the change, the legitimacy. This is back to the legitimacy concept. And so that if the members of a community believe that their decision makers actually heard folks through these deliberative processes and considered the input that was generated as a result of these processes, then the community, even if it disagrees with the decision that got made, will have seen that there was a process, a fair and open and transparent process that led to that decision. So yes, even though that's not the decision I would have made, it was an honest, legitimate process, and therefore I'm going to support our community, or at least not keep throwing grenades at the school board meeting, whatever the examples are.
So when we talk about engagement, really being about inclusion, I think for a lot of us, if you've been involved in public engagement, it's like, oh, we have to get a mix in the room. We have to get more voices. We have to make sure the people who are impacted by the decision are here, and that's all true. And I think that's easier and easier for people to sort of buy into. It's also a little bit about decentering expertise. A lot of great ideas go down because you don't have public buy-in. And we think, well, of course everybody, wants there to be preschool, or of course everybody, wants whatever change is coming along because the experts know that it's effective or it matters or it makes a difference. But unless you bring people along, you need to have them kind of be a part of it, not only so that they learn what you know, but so that your expertise is informed by everyday people. So it's a kind of a 360-degree sense of expertise, and also in when we really get to dig into it, it informs research when you really are meeting regular people, building relationships, and doing that work. So this is sort of engagement and inclusion, all around. One of the distinctions it's been helpful to make is the difference between public engagement, input, and public relations. One of the things that when we describe our work in public life, we're trying to impact public life and make sure that the institutions of public life work for everyone. So schools, municipal government, police, the court system, all of that. There's a lot of institutions of public life that need a marketing plan right now, right? They need a public relations plan. And in fact, oddly enough, when we work in schools, they want us to just get the good stories out. We're like, well, that's not exactly what we're doing, although we hope more of that will happen. Same with community policing right now. People aren't hearing any of the good stories. Well, and I'm sure some of those need to get out, but public engagement is different than public relations. We're going to tell you the good stories we want you to hear. Or public input, fill out this survey on the questions that we ask. Public engagement, the thick version of that, is going to include really some of that and more, back the other way. And it's across a whole continuum. And sometimes there's more expert-directed, less community involvement. You might tell people about the design of the school that has now been, finalized, or you might seek input on a survey. But ultimately, you want to be on that side of the spectrum, so that you actually are making decisions together. You are involving people in a way that is more equitable, and that you are deciding together. And again, that's really hard for us who think we know what we're doing, right? Because we do. We're very smart. But that's different. I'll learn this by the very end. So we have 4 specific stories that we're going to share. We're going to give ourselves maybe 3 minutes for each of them. And some of them have a video, but it's just sort of a sprinkling of some of the work that we've done in the last bit. So, beverage and alcohol.
Okay, and it occurs to me that I don't know if are we online here? We have a link here that we need to.
Oh, yeah.
Well, so how does that? How
It
do
could
we?
be live.
Click on it and see what happens.
Yeah.
See if the mystery.
So,
Well, I have to get the. That's a live link on the top of that.
yeah, let's see what happens here.
There you go. Oh.
Magical. So far.
Sound?
You have to act it out if it doesn't.
I know.
I think not only is it unusual to get the 3 tiers together,
Let's see. Where's the?
you have government officials here, you have legislators here, you have
Try to sound up here
prevention
too.
groups here. So I think that is the unique aspect of this.
Okay,
that
let's start at
all-
that from the
all
beginning
stakeholders
and blow it up.
It was designed to get a broad group from
Drag it back and then expand it here.
A little quiet, but listen carefully.
So actually, this was a sort of an unusual project for us, but it was a good example of the kind of language that this center uses. You talk a lot about boundary spanning. And so a lot of our work across sectors is to try to break down the boundaries that have typically kept people from connecting from that pathway to solutions, to use the language we were using earlier. And so there is this kind of boundary spanning effort in around this project, in which we brought together producers of wine and spirits in the state, distributors, so the sort of the business side, the people getting it out to the consumers. We brought together the restaurateurs and others who were selling it out in communities. But we also brought together the prevention community, who was concerned about the effects of alcohol on individuals and on communities. And we brought together the policymakers in the form of our state liquor commission and state legislators. And so this is just a 2 or 3 minute clip about what that looked like.
I think not only is it unusual to get the 3 tiers together, but I think it's unusual to get, you have government officials here, you have legislators here, you have prevention groups here. So I think that is the unique aspect of this, that truly all stakeholders are represented at this forum.
It was designed to get a broad group from the different players in the industry, from distributors to the state regulators to health professionals, retailers, legislators, and see if we could find some common ground for the next legislative session and really put together a well-thought agenda for the state here to help improve the overall industry.
First, this is pretty unprecedented to see all these different stakeholders in one space having this dialogue, and I was just thinking, what a great situation. I mean, this could be replicated in other states.
I mean, everyone I talked to this morning was a really, really reasonable person. No one seemed to come in with a cast iron agenda, like a bull in a china shop. And I think that bodes well. I think the whole concept of this meeting to begin with is pretty unique and interesting.
I think this conversation and bringing the stakeholders together has been a very effective way of communicating.
It's great to have all kinds of people from the industry and all the different silos here to kind of talk about challenges and concerns and what's working, what's not.
I think the dialogue's been great and somewhat unexpected that there's a lot more common ground than I think many of us expected.
I think the conversations that we had today were constructive and helpful toward advancing things in the future.
I think the takeaways is that, you learn what everybody is dealing with in their industry, and clearly there are some areas of opportunity for us all to work better, more collaboratively, and make some changes that will help the industry overall.
Well, I think it was a great opportunity to learn more about the entire alcohol distribution system in the state, from the processors, the producers, to the distributors, to the manufacturers, and to the retailers. That's very important to see that whole package come together and how that interacts with the Liquor Commission.
And how we continue to have this sort of collective communication and collaboration when it comes to, our common issues, which are sort of regulating beverage alcohol in New Hampshire. we can all agree on that. I think we all agree on tourism and sort of economic development and bringing more people to the state. So I think we can sort of put our issues that we don't agree on the side and focus on the big picture and create some value.
I think today was a good first step for everyone and kind of getting everything out on the table. So I think as long as we continue dialogue and push things forward, then it will end up better for the state and consumers.
I'll do that.
Back to your. I need to just shrink that.
It moves fast. There we go.
Okay, great. Yeah, this is you.
One thing I'll say about that one, you know, the prevention people in the room with a room full of people who make beer and wine and spirits, you know, they were very surprised at how much the people who were in that industry cared about regulation, safety. They talked about there needs to be more cabs. You know, there are all kinds of, you know, stuff at the level, and I think we're all really familiar with silos and the silos that play out in our lives and across sectors. And so some of this really is just about spanning the boundaries and breaking down the silos.
And I just guess I want to reinforce. Goodness. I think one of the people on the video said was this is the first time that mix of people have been in the room together. And we did a project several years ago on the future of water in New Hampshire. There was a governor's commission on the sustainability and future of water in our state. And so perhaps an odd thing to focus on in an part of the country that doesn't, in the past, hasn't suffered from the kind of drought that other parts of the state have. Now, of course, at least on the seacoast of New Hampshire, we've been in extreme drought for the past 8 or 9 months. I think it feels like it's finally broken. But we supported these statewide conversations across communities on the future of water. In the very end, brought together the ski industry, the municipal public works people, the recreation folks, the conservationists who are worried about loon breeding, the distribution farmers who are irrigating their fields, to talk about their common concerns about the future of water and the balance of regulation, ownership, control, autonomy, all of those northern New England issues that pop up when you begin to talk about individual rights, land rights, property rights. People were there who, you know, claimed that the water underneath their land is their water and the government, of course, should never take it away. This past summer, we saw a lot of people in our state, at least, digging new wells on their land without any public permission because their wells had gone dry, had failed, and they couldn't believe that the government had any role in telling them whether or not they were allowed to build a new well on their own land, on land that they owned. So, on these examples.
CAPE is one of the projects that we did in the last couple of years. It stands for Climate Adaptation Plan for Exeter. And it was a full science transfer project. I'm not sure what terms you use, but it was with the Great Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. And the focus, we had a team that was public health, hydrologists, ecosystem scientists, public engagement specialists. There was someone who was studying our ability to collaborate and our ability to collaborate with the community. The community, our ability to communicate with the community in a way that was, absorbable. We got a lot of trouble in the beginning because our slides, when we were like talking about science stuff, were ridiculous and way too detailed, and we had an awesome town manager who was bossy in the most awesome kind of way. She said, if you're going to put a slide up on the screen with a map, you pause and you let people find their house. You orient them to the map. You don't just put a slide, a map up on the screen and keep going. So she was really great about helping us be better about just being with people, helping people understand, and not throwing terms at folks, that need unpacking. So the whole focus of this climate adaptation, there was a lot around ecosystem health. A lot of the public engagement was around flooding. And at the same time, I was talking earlier with some folks about dams. there was a dam study group that was trying to decide whether this dam was coming out or not. They've since voted to bring it out in Exeter. I think it's coming down right now or in process in some way. But these projects are rare. They're time intensive to really get all the scientists and the community and people trying to, make those points of interaction between the science team and the community, make that productive time, was hard. It was, it was really great, but it was pretty time intensive. And one of the things that came out of this is that Exeter has very specific, very local data now about their community, about flooding. So they ground truthed it, not only based on measurements and this isn't my expertise. They had those little measurement things in the water grates and all that kind of stuff. Somebody else can throw the terms around. But they also talked with people, and they had folks say, where do you see flooding? And we would do maps with stickers, or where, when you were driving, where did you get trapped, or where could you stay? Were there places where there was no way for emergency vehicles to get in or out? Do you have swift water rescue stuff with your EMT crew now? That kind of stuff. So a lot of stuff was on the table, but the hydrologists that then ran all these models for Exeter definitely used what the community said they valued. The areas of town that they valued for different kinds of activities and how much water it's under, at different times of the year. So it was a very full project, which was a great experience to be able to be a part of. Similar, it's another project that's underway right now, and this is a community assessment on buffers. And there are 4 towns around the bay, up and down river, that lead into the Great Bay. And they have been interviewing engineers and consultants from outside communities who work with communities, town managers, planners, community members who live on the water, sort of this whole range of lay people to professionals. And it's hard to even describe, but there were stacks of stickers, like address stickers, with quotes from all these people that we interviewed. And all I'm showing you this for is because it's a luxury to be able to theme that information. We took 4 hours and spread the theming all around the room. We had Post-its galore. It was a lot of fun. I was a little dizzy after from reading, but it's nice to be able to take a deep dive and do that. Many of you, if you're doing some kind of work like this, you don't always get to do that deep of a dive. But when you do, it's really informative, and they're learning a lot about buffers, why buffers aren't honored or protected, or when they are, how does that go down? What's the story about buffers? What are we not informed about around buffers? So that's one of the science transfers there.
I wanted to again emphasize what Michele said a minute ago about the intersection of values with data. So no matter what our project is or what the topic is, we always go first to values. Why did you come out tonight for this conversation? Why does this topic matter to you? What are the most important parts of your community that you either want to preserve or change? So we just stay with the values in the early part of a dialogue. And then we show people data. So given what we believe in, what do we know? What's our knowledge base around this topic? And then how do we marry the values that we bring into this conversation with the knowledge, with what we know about the topic, in order to arrive at those informed solutions that we're talking about. Thank you for setting that up. Part of the framing of today's talk was around crossing political divides. And so another tool that we use within New Hampshire Listens is called a living room conversation. It's a process that literally takes place in a living room, in which 2 people co-host, one person who identifies on one end of the political spectrum and the other co-host on the other end of the political spectrum, and they literally do it in one of those 2 people's living room. Each person gets to invite 4 or 5 friends who share those, in this case, political views, So in that living room, you've got 10 or a dozen people who represent a full spectrum of political views to talk to each other in a way that they don't otherwise. So this is a clip from CBS News that was taken during the New Hampshire primary season that brought together people across
Get ready to make decisions and make their voices heard. The differences of political opinion are often issues that divide neighbors, friends, and sometimes even drive couples apart. In New Hampshire, they're perfecting a basic idea to bridge those divides, and there is a model for people across the nation to follow too. Craig Boswell takes you to a living room conversation.
On this snowy evening in New Hampshire, a small group of people gathered inside a neighborhood home. Some of them never met.
Hi, Spencer.
Coming in.
They were invited in for a personal political conversation ahead of Tuesday's primary. It's called a living room conversation, intended to ignite constructive discussion over political differences. The couple hosting the event lives those differences daily.
I'm a Republican.
And I'm a Democrat.
And that set the stage.
I think our government has gotten too big.
It's like, where do you want it small and where do you want it big?
I think they can do a much better job managing immigration.
Tough topics ranging from immigration and gay marriage to gun control.
The overregulation, in my opinion, can be really toxic for the public if it is misplaced.
Spencer Littles is a Bernie Sanders supporter.
The federal government, I feel like, sometimes has to really push the states.
83-year-old Nancy Boyle has not missed an election since 1964.
And to be perfectly honest, for this election, I haven't decided yet which ballot I'm going to take.
The dialogue came without discord.
Is this fun?
It was for me.
I think it's that unpredictability that makes people's passions really come out. Like, I want to know what your passion. I like the passions that come with it because that says, like, where you really stand for.
Michele Holt-Shannon arranges these conversations through the University of New Hampshire.
Let's keep talking and go through this because our country depends on that in a lot of ways too.
She believes opening up homes will help open up minds. In Rollinsford, New Hampshire, Craig Boswell, CBS News.
Now, if you
Can I just say, so so you can look up living room conversations online. They're awesome partners, and they do living room conversation guides on all kinds of topics. I'm pretty sure, including climate change and other things. But CBS News heard about it like right before the primary and called us up and said, "Can you do one? Then we could come to." And I was like, "I don't have one scheduled," but we tried. We made it happen. So anyway, back up. And so the last sort of snippet that we'll share is some work that we've been doing that has a statewide kind of piece to it, but is all about local delivery. And that is conversations between communities and their police departments. So at the statewide level, we have been working with folks to get a partnership with New Hampshire has two NAACPs with the Seacoast and Manchester. So Seacoast and Manchester NAACP, the New Hampshire Chiefs of Police Association, and us. And so we're the three partners at the state level who are helping local communities have conversations about community policing. And they're all we're just getting started on this work. They're all very different and unique depending on the community. So for example, in Dover, the group that gathered to start planning is a group of activists who are active with Black Lives Matter, but they're mostly white college students, okay? And so they wanted to have conversations with Dover police in terms of, what are you making of what you're seeing nationally? Can you talk to us about that? Are you paying attention to the report on 21st century policing, and are you planning to get body cameras, and like all of that kind of stuff. And we have 5 interns coming next summer, to work with us. 3 of them are of color. Should we worry about them, in this community? So it's like a whole range of stuff around certainly reflecting what's happening nationally, but saying what they're feeling now and what they are hearing from their friends, locally. Another one in Manchester, which is a much more racially diverse community, will have a different flavor to it, and that planning is just getting started. But we'll have probably a fairly active voice with New American Africans, which is one of the refugee groups that folks living in the community. There's two things that I want to put in your brain. One is, are you guilty of trickle down engagement? The first time I read an article that asked me that, I was like, ouch, ooh, sting, sting. Like, totally sometimes guilty of trickle down engagement. And when you're trying to get to where you are doing the most full engagement that is authentic and shared, you will do some trickle down engagement to get there. But don't stay there. Just keep pushing through it. Accept the criticism and learn, which is, and this, I don't know how old this is. I should have looked up the date on it. But this is a famous poster. It comes with the article on the ladder of citizen participation. But I participate, you participate, he participates, we participate, you participate, they profit. And so really paying attention to who, and I think we're on the verge of this being more and more asked of us, which is people saying, oh, you do engagement work, will you work with these people so they'll agree with us so we can, build this thing, or so we can make this thing happen. It can be done so well, and it can be done so badly if you're not paying attention to where's the information going, who's asking for the work. How are we creating equal voice? So back to the police, the students that met with the first couple of police that we were working with, they like you guys are in suit and ties, you got your guns on, this is intimidating. And so one of the things that they said that they wanted to create was an environment where we all wear our favorite t-shirt. So the next time the chief came out, he has this, t-shirt that his daughter gave him, from Maui when she went on her wedding honeymoon. And he had a story about it. And so it's things like that, like it takes a little work. You never know where that's going to go, in the Exeter work, people started telling us, you need to slow down. I know you want to come in and flick through your climate change slides. You need to slow down. You need to pause. You need to take questions. You need to hear us. Don't just talk at us. And it's like we know that, but we had to hear it. We had to hear it again. And so I think that this whole article, I recommend it. But I think that challenging ourselves to pay attention to why we're saying yes. And so, for example, with the police work, one of the reasons that I'm saying yes is to expose officers to people who don't see the police as safe, but in a way that's safe, right? In a way that's respectful, not a video online where people feel yelled at, back and forth. And so to be clear that they were one of the audiences for the conversation and the work. So.
We didn't do a very good job of leaving interaction time. We're here, yeah. And for anybody that would like to stay, we're happy to continue. So sorry.
I know we each have 10 minutes, 15 minutes worth of things that we want to ask, and I know that there's a lot to really think about here. That's wonderful. Even though we need to go, a couple of quick questions. And can you just introduce who you are? So.
Yeah, I'm Francois Marr in the Honors College. I'm really interested by the group you've built, and I wonder how do you engage with a new project, or how does that happen?
Yeah. One thing I want to emphasize was we don't pick topics. We need to be. We've developed over the period of time, and this is really the most important thing to us, perhaps, is to maintain our reputation as trusted and impartial conveners. We don't set agendas. So over the 6 or 7 years, we now have a process, not a formal process, but people come to us all the time. We're stuck on this issue. We're trying to figure out what the right solution is to that topic in our community or in our network of organizations. We don't do strategic planning. We aren't consultants for organizational development or strategic planning. We provide resources and tools for participatory engagement based on face-to-face deliberation. We don't use forms of social media very much at all, except for some outreach purposes to get people to a face-to-face conversation. And so basically we are responsive to the changing and dynamic conditions out in communities all across the state, as well as to regions, as well as at the state level. So a governor's commission, we've done statewide conversations for I think 5 different governor's commissions. But the real heart of the work is locally. So whether it's a dangerous intersection that people are fighting over whether to put a rotary or a stoplight in, or whether or not we should invest $39 million in a new high school, or just try to make the one we currently have work with some bubble gum and duct tape, or how to confront the reality that 2- and 3-year-olds in our community are at home with parents who are incapable of taking care of them because the parents are addicted and they're strung out during the day, and the grandparents are not taking care of them. So we are responsive to those conditions as they occur, and we work with state leaders and stakeholders who are sort of the eyes and ears of these. We have an advisory council, and we have partners all over the state who say to us things like, I think New Hampshire Listens, I think the tools that you provide would be useful here. So
are there places where you might say, this is going beyond what we provide, and you say, no, we can't do that?
Oh yeah, definitely. And we also, if it's as
We're
Michele
not very
sort
good
of,
at that, though.
Michele, well, at one point we had the statewide coalition against the death penalty come to us and say we'd love to have statewide conversations about the death penalty. Their purpose, of course, was to abolish the death penalty, a cause that I happen to be personally sympathetic to. But what we had to say to them was, we will only develop that kind of initiative if you also bring with you the folks that want to sustain the death penalty. This has the framing and the design itself has to be across sectors and across positions in order for us to be legitimate and trusted and transparent and impartial in that convening process.
Do you get caught in that binary relationship a lot, or are you able to sort of get away from that? I'm sorry, I'm asking too many.
No, it is. I was going to throw in a funding thing if you're interested in that. But I think it's tricky because if you're too sterile about your neutrality, then all the emotion goes away. So I feel like, especially with this community police stuff, I have had to get to know police in a way that is totally authentic, so I can understand where they're coming from, and get to know communities of color who are angry and don't want to deal with this inequity anymore. So it's hard to walk it and not just make it so binary. Intermediary is an internal term that I think we're intermediaries, but I think that still means that you're developing, when it's all working, genuine relationships with people across the.
And we gave up on the term neutrality some time ago. It's hard.
Fair. We're
fair.
We're trying to be
we're
fair.
talking about fair and being impartial, and so on.
Tim, do you have a real quick one? No. Oh, go ahead. Ask it, and then
We're not in a rush.
I'm really interested in whether you've given some thought to how you kind of institutionalize these processes.
Yeah.
So that when you guys leave, it's not a project by project thing, but it becomes an ongoing process within communities.
The one part that so I was going to say earlier, we have some community foundation funding. Most of it's contracts, and certainly sitting in the Carsey School at UNH, has an impact in a lot of ways. But we don't get. I'm soft funded. We don't get money for existing, and so. I have thought a lot about that, like the decision to be centrally lean. I think we made pretty early on and have stuck with it because there's no reason not to be. Local listens groups, we have about 10 at various stages of development around the state. North Country listens, Portsmouth listens, Dover listens. And so those groups are critical, I think, because they're independently owned and operated. They sign on to the same principles that we have. We're partners with them, but they are local capacity for engagement that is sustained in that community. Occasionally, some people get funded to through a grant in a local community to kind of work in that environment. mostly it's all volunteers, and so how do we sustain that? That's our kind of current nugget that we're trying to work on.
And it's very much a part of our explicit mission to build capacity, to build that civic infrastructure so that it's there at the community level, at the local level, and doesn't depend on people from UNH. But the capacity and the knowledge and expertise are there. We've had moderate success with that, I would say, again, depending on the local leadership and some minimum amount of resources locally. But we coach communities. It takes 3 to 4 years to develop that kind of capacity at the local level. So a lot of what we do is coaching, community organizing, and then building toolkits. They're literally downloadable kinds of toolkits that people can use depending on what the topic is.
The last thing I'll say is we're anchor partners of Everyday Democracy, which is a national organization. And I think this is another reason I think it matters that we're at the university and that we're connected with Everyday Democracy. Our stuff is in the commons. It's not magic. It's not trademarked. It's not, people do this kind of stuff all the time, and we realize they need people who can show up and be confident about public meetings, because a lot of us are scared of them. But the stuff that we're doing, the designs, the stuff that's out there from Everyday Democracy, discussion guides, facilitator training, it's all there, and it's easy to access. It just takes pulling it together. So.
Can we give our colleagues another hand? We're getting into two things. One is think about somebody who wanted